Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a time when the world smelled like burning hair, horses were the Wi-Fi, and your entire career depended on not passing out next to a flaming pit. We're diving deep into the soot-covered, hammer-pounding, back-breaking reality of being a medieval blacksmith. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Picture this, you open your eyes before dawn in a thatched roof cottage that leaks in every season. Your hands already ache, and your back sends a passive-aggressive twinge reminding you that you're not 20 anymore, though, to be fair, in this century, even that's pushing it. The air tastes like ashes and damp straw, and someone is already banging on your door, yelling about a snapped horseshoe. The forge hasn't even been lit yet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. Always curious who else is lying in bed listening to medieval misery. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the yard, your boots squishing into something you hope is mud. A chicken eyes you with suspicion. The forge looms ahead, more shed than sanctuary. Inside, it's dark, cold, and smells like old smoke and fear. You stack charcoal like someone stacking their own funeral pyre and begin pumping the bellows, watching the embers blink awake. The temperature rises. So does your blood pressure. You're a blacksmith, which is like being Amazon, Uber Eats, and a mechanic all rolled into one, only without the tips or the air conditioning. You're responsible for every plowshare, nail, horseshoe, and hinge this village needs. Oh, and sometimes swords, because nothing says community like weapons at the local bake sale. The first job today? A broken latch for the baker's oven. Not glamorous, but that bread won't bake itself. You toss the iron into the forge, wait for it to glow, then drag it out and slam it on the anvil. The clang rings through the morning mist like a medieval alarm clock. The apprentice, who's late again, stumbles in chewing something suspiciously raw. You sigh. Deeply. As you hammer, sparks fly, stinging your arms. Tiny bits of molten iron embed themselves in your skin like glitter from hell. You're already sweating. There's no concept of layers here, you wear wool or you freeze. So now you're cooking inside a sheep. And while the bread latch cools, someone else appears, a knight this time. Great. His helmet is dented. Probably from forgetting it's not a drinking cup. He drops it at your feet and barks something about needing it fixed before the tournament in 3 days. You nod because arguing with a man who owns a broadsword is not career savvy. There's a rhythm to this life, though. Iron in. Heat. Hammer. Quench. Repeat. You barely notice your hands moving anymore. The tools are extensions of you. Which is great, except they also weigh about as much as a toddler made of stone. By midday, your shoulders feel like they're trying to escape your body and go live somewhere quieter. Here's a fun mainstream historical fact to keep you going: blacksmiths weren't just essential, they were revered in many early medieval communities. The ability to shape metal bordered on magical. Some believed smiths had secret knowledge passed down from gods or spirits. Of course, that mystical reputation didn't exactly help when the crops failed, and someone needed blaming. Speaking of curses, there's a quirky detail for you: some early blacksmiths were buried with their anvils, as if they couldn't catch a break even in death. Imagine lugging that into the afterlife. What's in your sarcophagus, Greg? Oh, just 200 pounds of professional regret. And historians still argue whether the earliest guilds formed to protect smiths from economic exploitation or from the village mob when a sword cracked mid-battle. Either way, you're not unionized. You're just tired. Afternoon creeps in with a haze of heat and hammer blows. The apprentice drops a bucket of nails, then nearly falls into the fire retrieving them. You consider whether accidental combustion counts as divine punishment. Probably not. Lunch? If you're lucky, it's crusty bread and a questionable sausage. You chew with the same enthusiasm you hammer with, just enough to survive. There's no time to savor anything. Someone's cow kicked its yoke loose, and guess who's the only person within a 20-mile radius who can fix metal? Yep. It's you. Again. The forge is your kingdom, but it's also your prison. It eats your time, your energy, your future. You've got burns on your burns and a permanent kink in your neck that no medieval chiropractor is going to fix. Not that they exist. The best you'll get is a nun with a poultice and an "I'll pray for you." Evening rolls around, and you're still going. That night? Yeah, he's back. His friend's sword snapped in half during training, which sounds suspiciously like, we used it to chop firewood. Still, you nod and take the broken blade. More work. More heat. More hammering. Outside, the village begins to quiet. Chickens cluck their way into coops. The occasional scream means the tavern's open. You, meanwhile, are shaping metal in the half-dark, eyes stinging, fingers raw. No one's singing songs about you. No one's penning epics called the guy who fixed everyone's doorknobs. But still, you shape the world one hinge at a time. You build what they break. You take the raw and make it useful. You may be invisible, but without you, nothing works. As the last spark flickers out and you lay down your tools, the silence hums louder than the forge ever did. Your bones ache. Your breath is thick with smoke. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Your shop is a furnace, and not the cozy kind you might find in a log cabin with hot cocoa and a dog named Biscuit. No, your workplace is a hissing, growling box of concentrated misery where temperatures soar, air barely circulates, and the only fan you've got is your own exasperated sigh. Welcome to the medieval forge, where open concept just means more room for heat to slap you in the face. You start the fire again before dawn, shoveling charcoal with hands that haven't stopped aching since the last harvest. Every movement stirs a plume of fine black dust that coats your throat, your eyes, even your eyebrows. You look like a poorly made chimney sweep. Ventilation? Not a chance. You've stuffed a rag in the one tiny window just to keep the wind from ruining the heat. So now you're also keeping the smoke, congratulations. The forge fire gets hot. How hot? Think 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take, and that's if your bellows are working properly. Speaking of which, your bellows are stitched leather sacks that wheeze like a dying ox. Every time you pump them, you get a puff of hot air and the subtle reminder that you're one snapped seam away from becoming a human torch. And then there's the anvil, your best friend and mortal enemy. It's heavy, unyielding, and it never lets you forget that gravity was invented to hurt you. The ringing sound it makes every time you strike it. Sure, it's kind of romantic in theory. But after the 100th blow, it's less like a symphony and more like being trapped inside a very angry bell. Your ears ring constantly. You're basically inventing tinnitus centuries before it's cool. A fun mainstream fact to ponder while you're wiping your face with the same rag you use to hold hot iron: in many towns, the blacksmith's forge was deliberately placed near the center of village life. That wasn't out of respect, it was because everyone needed you, all the time. Gates broke. Tools snapped. Horses lost shoes like they were in a rom-com, and no one could get anything done unless you were on fire. Literally. You pause to drink water that's somewhere between rust-flavored and definitely contaminated, then get back to work on a farmer's sickle. It's bent like an old man's spine, and the edge is so dull it couldn't cut butter. You heat it, hammer it, and shape it back into something resembling a blade. Your shirt clings to your body. Your hands are wet. You're 40% sweat, 20% soot, and 40% rapidly approaching heatstroke. Ever wonder why medieval blacksmiths had such thick forearms? It's not just from hammering. It's from lifting everything else too. You've got to haul coal, drag metal, pump the bellows, and swing heavy tools for 10 hours straight. Your whole life is one long gym session without the protein shakes or applause. And here's a quirky little tidbit: some smiths used animal urine to quench metal. Not water. Not oil. Urine. Because apparently, the ammonia helped harden the steel. Imagine the smell. Now imagine it's hot. You're welcome. Outside, a group of children throws stones at a rat. You wish you could trade places with the rat. It has no responsibilities, and it doesn't have to shape molten iron into door hinges while its lungs beg for mercy. But no, you're stuck here. Your job is the worst, and the worst part is that it's also essential. There's a pot bubbling in the corner, some leftover stew you forgot was there. It smells faintly of cabbage and burnt regret. You eat it anyway, because the forge doesn't stop for lunch, and neither do you. Plus, you're too afraid to let your apprentice try cooking again after the soap in the porridge incident. Speaking of which, the apprentice is currently sweeping ashes into a pile that somehow defies all physics by growing instead of shrinking. He sneezes, which sends a fine mist of soot into the air. You both watch it drift upward, then cough in unison like a miserable duet. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths in the Middle Ages had actual apprenticeships with structure and mentorship, or if it was more of a throw a child into the fire and see what happens scenario. Based on your current situation, you're leaning hard toward the latter. Another item on today's agenda: shoeing a particularly grumpy horse named Gilda. You don't trust her. She doesn't trust you. It's mutual disrespect. She's enormous, and her hooves are about the size of dinner plates. You secure her leg and brace yourself. One slip and you'll be explaining to the village healer how you lost all your teeth to livestock. The job takes forever. The shoe isn't shaped right. You redo it. Gilda stomps. Your apprentice almost cries. You finally finish, and the farmer tips you with a sack of potatoes and a very confident "God bless." That's your paycheck. Potatoes. Which you will now burn because you forgot about them while forging 3 dozen nails. You return to your fire. The heat smothers you again. You're lightheaded. Is that ringing in your ears or the village church bell? Who knows anymore? You drink more water and pretend it helps. By nightfall, your entire shop smells like scorched wool, old garlic, and whatever crawled into the chimney and died last spring. You wipe your face again. The rag is somehow wetter than before. Your tunic is stiff with dried sweat and soot. You haven't seen clean fabric in weeks, and if one more person brings you a broken hinge, you might scream into the night sky like a tragic opera character. Your last task is a sword. Not a fancy one, just a basic blade for a local guard. You work silently, methodically. Hammer. Heat. Quench. Hammer again. The shape emerges slowly, like a secret being whispered into iron. It's almost beautiful. You even smile a little, despite yourself. Then your apprentice knocks over the water bucket. Again. You literally break everything. And not just the iron bars you're supposed to reshape or the tools you use to hit them, no, you break yourself, too. Every single day, something cracks, snaps, pops, or aches. Your hammer chips. Your tongs warp. Your back decides to do its own interpretive dance with gravity. And your knees? They've filed for divorce and are waiting for the paperwork to go through. It starts subtle. You bend over to lift an iron rod and your spine makes a sound like someone stepping on old parchment. You pause. Look around. Nothing seems to have exploded, so you keep working. But the damage is accumulating. Your joints are like overused door hinges, worn, noisy, and only functioning out of sheer spite. You grip your hammer, which used to feel sturdy but now wobbles ever so slightly. The wooden handle has splinters the size of porcupine quills, and you keep meaning to replace it, just as soon as you finish fixing 23 other things for people who somehow break iron more often than they break bread. You're forging nails today, which sounds easy until you realize you have to make hundreds of them, by hand, from bars of raw metal that are stubbornly cold every time you try to reheat them because your bellows are on strike. You're striking, too, iron, that is. And every blow sends shockwaves from your arm to your shoulder, like medieval CrossFit with worse music and no sense of accomplishment. A mainstream historical fact to wrap your throbbing wrist around: medieval blacksmiths didn't have power tools or ergonomic anything. Every piece of equipment was manual, and it all weighed a ton. A single hammer could clock in at 4 to 6 pounds. And yes, that's light, until you swing it 5,000 times a day. You swap to a smaller hammer, but the relief is temporary. Your fingers are stiff and knotted. Calluses split open when you grab hot metal with wet gloves. Blisters bloom like sad little flowers of failure. You've got muscle memory, but now it's more like muscle resentment. And that anvil you love hate so much? It's developed a hairline crack. Not enough to make it useless, but enough to send that weird twang sound up the handle into your elbow with every strike. You feel it in your bones, like a metal whisper saying, maybe take up something less fatal, like plague curing. Let's talk about your tools for a second. You forged many of them yourself, which would be impressive if they didn't insist on breaking at the worst possible times. Your tongs just snapped at the hinge. 1 second you're holding a glowing iron rod, the next it's flying toward the apprentice like a meteor of doom. He dodges, barely. You both stare at the scorched spot on the floor and pretend that didn't just almost kill someone. This is your life, everything you use betrays you. Your tools break. Your forge collapses if you sneeze too hard. Your body rebels. Even your shoes have holes the size of pigeons in them. You'd replace them, but, you guessed it, you have to make them first. And who has time for that? Quirky tidbit of the night: some blacksmiths wore iron rings on their thumbs not just for protection, but to mark their trade. Sort of like a business card, only constantly red-hot and fused to your identity. A few even believed these rings held power, lucky charms to ward off injury or failure. You, personally, have tried wearing one. It didn't help. You're still on a first-name basis with chronic pain. Today, someone brings you a broken sword with the blade twisted like a pretzel. Can you fix it? They ask, as if that's a normal question. You don't laugh. You just nod and say the blacksmith equivalent of, sure, I'll just perform a miracle real quick. That's your job, taking warped metal, exhausted tools, and your own declining health, and producing something that looks vaguely functional. And historians still argue whether blacksmiths had any real training in metallurgy, or if it was more trial, error, and divine intervention. Judging by the pile of scrap you've accumulated, you're pretty sure it's the latter. You set the sword aside and turn back to your vise, which, of course, won't stay tight. The screw threads are worn smooth, and tightening it just makes it spin uselessly in place. You kick it. It mocks you by holding nothing. You reach for another clamp, but that one's rusted shut. There are moments you wish you had magic powers. Not for world domination, just something simple, like snapping your fingers and getting a new pair of tongs that don't squeak like a dying bat. Or maybe the ability to hammer with your mind, so your elbows could go on holiday to somewhere cooler and less emotionally damaging. Later, you pause to inspect a chain you've been commissioned to make for the mill gate. One of the links won't close properly. You try to reshape it, but the iron's gone brittle from too many reheats. You sigh, toss it in the scrap pile, and start over. Again. This is the 5th chain you've tried to make today. You dream in loops and broken circles. By dusk, your left knee won't bend without negotiation. Your right wrist feels like it's full of gravel. You consider using the horse trough as an ice bath, but then remember that horses have been urinating in it all week. You settle for cold air and lean against the wall, eyes half closed. Someone knocks on the door. Of course. A hinge is broken. A cart will needs reinforcement. A plow cracked in the middle of a turnip field. They all come to you. The man who makes everything, while everything around him breaks. The apprentice mutters something about going home. You grunt and wave him off. He limps out, dragging a broom behind him like a medieval Eeyore. You get back to work. There's always something that needs fixing. The forge hisses as you pump the bellows one more time. You watch the embers bloom red, yellow, white. You hold a metal rod with cracked gloves and a steady grip, and you whisper to no one in particular, please. Just don't break. You stink. And not in the charming, just came back from a jog, kind of way, but in the deep, historically accurate, you may be one with the forge now, sense. You smell like sweat that's had time to ferment. Like scorched wool, damp leather, burned hair, and the uniquely pungent aroma of a person who hasn't bathed properly since last Michaelmas. And bathing isn't a thing you just do in this life. There's no hot shower waiting after a long day. You've got a bucket, maybe two, if you're rich in buckets. The water's probably cold, possibly slimy, and almost definitely shared with the livestock. And soap. If you're lucky, someone in your village has boiled down animal fat and ashes into something vaguely cleansing that doubles as pest repellent. It smells worse than you do. You peel off your tunic, and it makes a sound like old paper tearing. It's stiff with sweat and soot, and parts of it seem to have merged with your skin. Your undershirt, once white, now resembles a used bandage. You give it a sniff and instantly regret every decision you've made this week. There's something about a forge that just clings. The smoke has a personality, aggressive, a little passive-aggressive, and determined to live in your pores. No matter how many times you wash your face, your skin stays grayish and smells like it belongs in a chimney sweep horror story. The odor even gets into your hair, which you haven't trimmed since spring. It's matted in places and, if we're honest, kind of crunchy. A lock near your temple has been permanently styled by accident after you leaned too close to a spark. You're not sure what texture that is anymore, crispy. Forge fried. Mainstream fact time, in medieval Europe, most people didn't bathe daily, or even weekly. Water was sometimes seen as risky, especially if it was standing water or from communal sources. Bathhouses existed in some places, but they weren't available to most peasants, and even when they were, they often doubled as, well, places for extracurricular activities that had very little to do with cleanliness. You dunked your hands into a barrel of rinsed water you set aside earlier. The water's warm, too warm, actually, from sitting in the sun all day. There's a thin scum floating on top. You pretend not to see it and use the water to wipe your face. It helps. A little. A quirky tidbit for your nose to consider. Some blacksmiths tried to mask the smell of the forge by burning herbs like rosemary or sage in the corners of their shops. Whether that helped or just turned everything into smoked rosemary iron is debatable, but it at least made you feel like you were trying. Your apprentice once suggested rubbing lavender into your gloves. That backfired immediately. Lavender turns rancid after enough heat and sweat, and by mid-morning you smelled like an herb garden set on fire. The other villagers politely avoided eye contact. One child cried. You sit outside your forge now, on a rickety stool that somehow also smells bad. The breeze is weak, but at least it moves the air a little. Your boots are off, and your socks are, well, they're beyond help. One has a hole big enough to qualify as a window. The other seems to have fused with your heel. Historians still argue whether medieval blacksmiths had any way to keep their working spaces hygienic, or if, like you, they simply learned to live inside a cloud of their own stink. There are no surviving guides to forge freshness, though there is a folk tale about a blacksmith who tried to clean his shop and accidentally flooded it, losing half his tools and his dignity. As you contemplate changing your shirt for the first time in a week, you remember the last time you washed your clothes. It involved a river, a rock, and 30 minutes of whacking your tunic against it while downstream a goat stared at you like you were ruining its day. You still haven't gotten the grit out of the sleeves. You do a smell test on your spare tunic. It's not better. Just different. You opt for a light spritz of forge musk and pretend it's cologne. And honestly, no one's going to notice. Everyone in town smells bad. The butcher reeks of blood. The tanner smells like rotting animal hides. Even the baker carries a faint aroma of burned flour and despair. But you're special. You smell like metal, smoke, blood, ash, and anxiety. You're the town incense. Wherever you go, people know. Children sniff and point. Dogs follow you for reasons you don't want to investigate. You try cleaning under your fingernails with a sliver of iron. It kind of works. Your nails are black, not from dirt exactly, but from a permanent blend of soot and coal dust that settled there like it's paying rent. The skin beneath them is sore, the edges cracked. You wrap one in a bit of linen and hope for the best. At night, your bedding doesn't help. It's stuffed with straw that smells like it used to be near animals. You lie down and the scent of your own body radiates back at you like an aggressive bedtime story. You fall asleep dreaming of soap. Luxurious, creamy soap. You wake up coughing on soot. And the worst part? You're nose blind. You don't even smell it all anymore. It's the visitors, the priest, the merchant, the rare noble who needs a ceremonial blade, they smell you. And they wince. And they still ask you to fix things because, let's face it, no one else will. There's a part of you that thinks, maybe, just maybe, if you really wanted to, you could clean up a bit more. Wash the linens. Boil the gloves. Hang up your apron so it doesn't ferment overnight. But there's always something more urgent. A tool to repair. A fire to stoke. A sword to finish. So instead, you splash a little more barrel water on your face, rub it in with your filthy hands, and smile through the grime. This is the smell of hard work. Of survival. Of daily proximity to flames and failure. This is the smell of a blacksmith. And no matter how much it stinks, it's yours. Your ears are ringing again. Not metaphorically, from the scolding you got this morning when the mayor's son tripped over that horseshoe you forgot to move, but literally. A high-pitched, mosquito-on-a-sugar rush kind of buzz that follows you everywhere now. You don't even hear the birds anymore. Or maybe they just got tired of trying to compete with the constant clang of your hammer. You raise your arm for another strike, and the sound rebounds off the forge walls like a shriek in a cave. It vibrates in your teeth. It drills into your skull. You'd swear you can taste it, iron and old pennies. It's not just the hammering, either. The bellows whoosh with every pump. Sparks hiss. The metal groans when it bends, cracks when it cools too fast. You drop a tool, and it clatters like a whole orchestra falling down a staircase. Sensory overload. Welcome to your every waking moment. Mainstream historical fact, medieval forges were incredibly loud environments. Blacksmiths worked in stone or timber buildings that echoed and amplified every impact. Without any ear protection, no plugs, no muffs, no clever little foam pieces, you simply absorbed the noise into your body. The result? Partial or full hearing loss was likely an occupational norm. You might not even realize how deaf you're getting until someone behind you yells, "Fire," and you just nod and keep hammering. The apprentice tries to talk to you. He says something, maybe, "Do we have more coal?" or "My arm's on fire," but it's drowned out by a bar of iron sizzling in the quench barrel. You nod again. That usually works. He takes it as agreement and disappears behind a stack of wagon axles. And then there's the heat. Oh, the heat. Standing next to a forge is like trying to make conversation with a dragon mid-exhale. You don't sweat. You leak. Your shirt sticks to your ribs like wet parchment. Your breath feels heavier. Even your eyeballs sweat, somehow. You step closer to check the metal's color. Too dull, it needs more heat. You move the bellows, and the forge roars. A gust of hot air blasts your face. For a second, you feel like a pastry being cooked from the inside out. Fun fringe tidbit, some blacksmiths used to test metal temperature by eye, and occasionally by smell. A properly hot piece of iron gives off a very distinct scent, sort of like hot coins or singed rust. Some smiths swore they could detect precise heat stages by the smell alone. You've tried it. You just end up smelling more like regret. Historians still argue whether forges were deliberately ventilated with vents and chimneys, or if most blacksmiths simply suffered through the suffocating conditions. Some larger workshops had smoke holes or rudimentary flues, but you've got a hole in the roof and a door that refuses to stay open unless you prop it with a barrel. The wind only seems to blow into the forge, never out. Your lungs are blackened by more than just poor life choices. You cough now and then, a dry bark that sounds like a nail rattling in a tin cup. You're pretty sure there's soot in your stomach, too. One time, a flake drifted into your soup. You stared at it for a second. Then shrugged and slurped it down. Iron supplements, you joked. But the noise and the heat, those are constant. Inescapable. You've tried stuffing bits of wool into your ears. That lasted until they caught fire from a stray spark. Another time, you tied leather straps around your head like ear covers. They made you look like a very confused cow and did nothing to dampen the sound. The apprentice still brings it up when he wants to laugh quietly behind your back. You dream of silence. Not just quiet, but silence. A deep, velvety stillness where nothing crackles, clinks, or wheezes. A moment when your ears don't feel like tuning forks. But you wake up to the sound of the town crier yelling about grain prices. And then the banging begins again. It's gotten to the point where you flinch when it stops. When the forge is cold and the tools are still, you feel like something's wrong. Like the world is missing a beat. The ringing in your ears fills the silence with its own shrill performance. And what's really tragic is how few people understand it. To them, your work is just noise from across the village green. A nuisance. An interruption. No one thanks the blacksmith for the background music of their lives, just for the nails and blades and horseshoes. They don't know that you've sacrificed your hearing so their doors don't fall off. Sometimes, when it gets really bad, you walk out at night and sit by the river. No tools. No fire. Just water, moonlight, and that ever-present high-pitched buzz in your ears like a tiny ghost mosquito. You press your fingers to your temples and imagine what it would be like to hear a whisper again. Or the rustle of leaves. Or your own thoughts, undistorted by sonic warfare. You remember when you were younger and your master used to tell stories over the anvil, his voice low and warm. You could hear every word then. Every soft, once upon a time. Now, people have to shout twice to get your attention. And you nod a lot more just to cover up the parts you didn't catch. You worry it's getting worse. That soon, you won't even hear the hammer fall. But then you shrug. Because honestly, it could be worse. You could still be able to hear the nobleman who keeps coming by asking for a fancier doorknob. Maybe going deaf is your body's way of filtering the nonsense. You grab your hammer again. The sound rings out, sharp and final. The metal sings its one-note song, and the forge responds with a flicker of flame. And even as your ears throb and your skin prickles, you feel something else beneath it all, something warm and strangely comforting. This is your music. This is your rhythm. The sound of survival, one strike at a time. Your back hates you. Your shoulders joined the rebellion months ago. Your knees. They've started a passive-aggressive letter-writing campaign to the gods. Every morning, you creak out of bed like an old barn door, muscles stiff as frozen ropes, joints crackling like roasted chestnuts. You stretch, slowly, cautiously, and something pops. You pretend that's normal. You pretend that's fine. You're a blacksmith. This is the job. You lift. You twist. You hunch. You hoist. You balance a lump of iron that weighs more than your apprentice and then hold it steady while hammering it into something vaguely useful. That's not just a workout, that's a medieval fitness regime disguised as labor. Today, like every day, your first task is to move a wagon axle from one end of the shop to the other. It's long, it's awkward, and of course, it's hot from being near the forge all night. You wrap it in a rag, throw your shoulder into it, and immediately feel a lightning bolt of regret travel from your spine to your toes. Mainstream fact: blacksmiths in the Middle Ages were typically plagued by chronic physical injuries. Joint inflammation, herniated discs, and repetitive strain injuries were common, long before anyone invented the word ergonomic. Your body is your most abused tool, and unlike your hammer, it doesn't get reforged when it cracks. You try to stretch it out. Arms above your head. Gentle twist. You make it halfway through the twist before something spasms and locks up. You grimace, pretend that's just your forge face, and continue like nothing happened. Then comes the hammering. The rhythmic pounding doesn't just hurt your ears. It vibrates through your bones. Every blow sends shockwaves from your fingers up through your elbow into your shoulder socket, like you're a human tuning fork. Your dominant arm is stronger, sure, but it's also lopsided now. Your left side feels neglected, your right side feels abused. Together, they've formed a support group with your lower back as president. You bend over to grab a pair of tongs and your knees make a sound like someone crumpling parchment. You pause. Briefly consider rolling to the floor instead of bending the rest of the way. Your pride wins, for now. A fringe tidbit: some blacksmiths develop signature limps, not because of injury, but from the physical imbalance of always pivoting on the same leg while working. They'd lean a certain way, twist with one foot planted, and over time their muscles adapted, badly. You've noticed it yourself. One of your boots is wearing out faster than the other. You used to laugh at the older smiths in town when they shuffled along, leaning on their canes, complaining about the forge years. Now you wake up, massage your wrists, and realize you are them. The forge has aged you in strange places. Not your face, really. Not your eyes. But in the way your fingers resist closing in the morning. In the way your hip clicks every time you crouch. In the way your breath gets shorter if you lift anything over your head. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths had any form of physical therapy, or if they simply adapted their workflows to minimize the pain. Some think apprentices may have doubled as massage therapists or medical assistants, applying poultices or herbal rubs to aching joints. Others believe most smiths just powered through until something snapped for real. You take a break. Sit on the edge of your workbench and rub your shoulder with a bit of goose grease. It helps. Maybe. Or maybe you're just distracting yourself with the smell of slightly rancid bird fat. Either way, you feel slightly better, or at least marginally less doomed. Your apprentice watches you and asks if you're dying. You say, "Not yet." He nods. Offers you a cup of weak beer. You drink it. It doesn't heal anything, but it takes the edge off the afternoon's work. For about 20 minutes, your joints stop screaming and downgrade to murmuring complaints. At night, the pain doesn't leave, it just shifts. It becomes a dull throb in the background, like your bones are whispering to each other about how tired they are. You lie on your straw mattress and try not to move too much. The fewer positions you attempt, the fewer stabbing reminders you'll get from your hips and back. You dream of a hot spring, or a bathhouse, or even just someone with strong hands and no judgment. You sometimes wonder what it would have been like to have a standing desk. Or an adjustable stool. Or orthopedic shoes. You hear nobles have feather beds and silk pillows. You've got a flattened straw pile and a rolled-up apron that smells like regret and charred wool. And yet, somehow, you keep going. The body adapts in terrifying ways. You've stopped noticing certain aches. You've built calluses over calluses. Your joints crack, and you chuckle. You've even named your bad knee Harold. Harold, the harbinger of pain. Every so often, a villager offers you a bit of advice. Put leeches on your back, one says. Stand on one leg and scream into a barrel, says another. You thank them politely. You try none of it. Mostly because you've seen what happens when people do scream into barrels. The barrels echo back. It's very disheartening. So you carry on. You work slower in the mornings. You groan when you lift. But you still hammer. Still bend. Still carry that forge-baked burden. This isn't the kind of job that gives you medals or parades. It gives you swollen knuckles and a spine that curves like a question mark. But it also gives you the satisfying thunk of a tool made right. The warm hum of iron cooling in a perfect curve. The whispered praise of someone who needed a hinge, a plow, or a blade, and now has it, thanks to you. You ache all over, but it's the ache of someone necessary. And that's something. Even if you're one more twisted ankle away from being mistaken for a walking question mark. You smell like a roasted turnip dipped in rust. There's no polite way around it. You haven't been properly cleaned since, what month is it again? Your hands are blackened to the wrists, your apron has become a patchwork of sweat and soot, and under that, well, let's just say your tunic gave up trying to absorb the damage sometime last season. You didn't wake up hoping to become a walking smokehouse, but here you are. Every pore you possess is a chimney. Bathing is complicated. It's not that people in your village never wash, it's that no one really expects the blacksmith to show up smelling like rosewater and virtue. You're the muscle behind the anvils, the smoke-stained shadow of the village. If people can't smell you coming, they start to worry something's wrong. Mainstream historical fact, contrary to the stereotype, many medieval people did attempt to stay clean with the resources they had. Public bathhouses, river dips, and sponge baths weren't unheard of. But blacksmiths? You basically lose cleanliness in the fine print of the job. Water's hard to come by, and soap is a luxury. The soot doesn't scrub off, it settles in. You're part iron, part man, and completely disgusting by modern standards. You try sometimes. Really. You sneak off to the river, peel away the top few layers of grime, and hope the fish don't immediately float belly up. The cold water bites at your skin, and even though you scrub with sand and lie like your life depends on it, you emerge still smelling faintly of forge smoke and ancient onions. The apprentice once offered you some rosemary to tuck into your tunic, for the odor. You stared at him until he quietly retracted the offer and placed the sprig in a mug instead. Now it's a decoration. A symbol of good-smelling things you'll never experience firsthand. And the forge doesn't help. You stand by the fire all day, sweating out every drop of beer you drank at breakfast. The smoke clings to your clothes, your hair, your very soul. Your boots smell like old leather and damp regret. Your gloves, well, let's not even talk about your gloves. They've achieved sentience at this point and may soon demand voting rights. Here's a fun fringe tidbit, there were some blacksmiths who claimed soot and sweat acted as natural armor against illness. If the plague finds me, one old smith reportedly said, it'll trip on the filth before it reaches my lungs. That's probably not medically accurate, but it feels true when you're coated in a layer of protective grime thick enough to repel small insects. Your teeth. They're not great. Not terrible, but not great. You chew on iron filings sometimes, accidentally, you hope, and your gums occasionally protest with bleeding and the kind of itch that makes you want to scream into a horseshoe. You try chewing mint leaves, when you can find them, but mostly, you just hope no one expects you to smile. Grinning isn't exactly in your job description. Historians still argue whether hygiene expectations vary drastically by trade, or if people simply adjusted their tolerance based on utility. The baker. Floury, warm, and passably clean. The tanner. Smelled like the devil's outhouse, but people forgave it because they needed leather. You. You're somewhere in the middle, filthy, but forgivably so. You make nails. You make tools. You make horses slightly less homicidal. And because of that, people don't get too close. Not because they dislike you, but because your personal scent profile includes burnt hay, sweaty ambition, and charred rat. That last one isn't entirely your fault. One did crawl into the forge last month. It wasn't pretty. Now there's a faintly musky undertone to everything you touch. You've stopped noticing it, but others, not so much. You've tried perfumes. Well, not perfumes exactly, more like herbal concoctions made by the local herb wife. One batch made your armpits sting and your eyes water. Another one just made the apprentice sneeze uncontrollably for an hour. You gave up after the third one attracted a swarm of bees. They followed you around for a full afternoon. You nearly forged a new hive out of spite. There are days you dream of soap. Not just any soap, but the creamy kind made with tallow and lavender, the sort nobles use after hunts. You imagine lathering it up, rubbing it through your hair, the way the bubbles would carry away the soot, the crusted sweat, the regrets. But that's a fantasy. You'll be lucky if you manage a rinse and a scrub with last season's shirt. Still, you persevere. You joke with the apprentice that if anyone ever tries to rob the forge, all you need to do is lift your arm. The smell alone could stop a warhorse. You both laugh, and then the wind shifts, and you gag a little. That's fine. That's part of the brand now. There's comfort in consistency. You might smell like the underside of a burnt wagon wheel, but it's your smell. You've earned it. You've marinated in it. And while it may not attract romance or dinner invitations, it does get you a certain level of respect. The "he works hard" kind. The "don't hug him, but do thank him" kind. So you splash your face, scrape the dirt from under your nails with a chisel, and step back into the forge. The flames flare. The sweat returns instantly. Your shirt soaks through within minutes, and the stink settles back into your skin like an old friend. At least you're not alone. The apprentice is starting to catch the same aroma. He's still got that new smith smell for now, mostly fear and pine tar, but give it time. Soon, he'll stink like purpose too. And when people wrinkle their noses as you pass, you just smile, internally, of course. Smiling outwardly takes energy. And besides, your breath isn't helping matters. You're kneeling now. Not in prayer, although the position is similar. You're not seeking divine guidance, you're just trying to reattach a horseshoe to a hoof that's dangerously close to launching you into early retirement. The horse is named Daisy. Daisy has no idea how ironic that is. She's a half-ton of twitchy muscle and poor impulse control. Her tail swishes like a weaponized duster, and her ears keep flicking back toward you, as if she's planning something. You don't trust her. You've never trusted her. You never will. Blacksmiths in the Middle Ages often wore many hats, none of them actual hats, unfortunately, which is a shame considering how often you nearly get kicked in the skull. You're a farrier today, responsible for trimming hooves and nailing on iron shoes. A delicate art made significantly more exciting by the fact that your client would rather be literally anywhere else. Mainstream historical fact, blacksmiths frequently doubled as farriers in rural communities, since shoeing horses required both smithing and animal handling skills. Unfortunately, you were taught more about iron than about equine diplomacy. And Daisy? Daisy can smell fear. You grasp her leg. She lifts it. You start to trim the hoof, and then, without warning, she jerks. Your chisel slips. Your fingers get pinched. You bite your lip and breathe in sharply, tasting sweat and horse dandruff. The apprentice offers helpful advice from a safe distance, try talking to her gently. You respond with a look that suggests he talked to you gently before Daisy launches you into the grain bin. Trimming hooves is part sculpting, part guessing game. Too much off the front, and Daisy's gait goes wonky. Not enough, and she starts throwing shoes like a disgruntled housemaid. Somewhere in between lies the magical sweet spot, except she won't stop fidgeting, and the forge's heat is still soaking into your shirt like lava through cotton. Fringe tidbit, some medieval blacksmiths swore by odd calming methods for horses, singing lullabies, rubbing garlic on their hands, or even blowing softly into the horse's nostrils. You once tried that last one. The horse sneezed in your face. You still haven't emotionally recovered. You get the first shoe off. That's the easy part. Now comes the forging of the new one. You move back to the forge and fire it up. The bellows groan under your effort, the coals glow, and you slide a metal blank into the heat. It needs to bend just so, curved perfectly to Daisy's stubborn foot. You try not to rush, but you know she's out there getting bored. And a bored horse is a dangerous horse. Like a toddler with hooves and the ability to kick down a wall. The metal glows red, then orange. You pull it from the fire and hammer quickly, clink, 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 rounding the edges, checking the fit against the wooden form. Sparks fly. Your shirt smolders briefly. You pat it out and keep going. A fresh horseshoe has about 3 seconds of perfect pliability. You miss that window, and it's back to the fire again. You finish, cool the shoe in a bucket of water, it hisses like a sleeping dragon, and return to Daisy. She greets you with a snort and a side eye. You feel honored. You lift her hoof again and press the shoe against it. It fits. Miraculously. You start hammering the nails in, careful not to go too deep. The goal is to pierce the tough outer wall of the hoof, not the soft, sensitive middle. You've hit the sensitive part before. You'd rather not relive that experience. Historians still argue whether farrier training was passed on informally or standardized through guilds and apprenticeship. In smaller villages like yours, it's mostly trial and error, with emphasis on the error. You once shot a goat by mistake. It didn't go well. The goat seemed fine with it. The owner did not. You managed to nail all 4 shoes on. You step back. Daisy stamps once, twice, then takes a casual trot to the far side of the yard. No limping. No dramatics. Just the satisfying clink of iron on stone. You exhale. Victory. Until you remember that you've got 3 more horses waiting. Each one has a different personality. There's Bramble, who refuses to lift his back legs unless you bribe him with carrots and compliments. There's Old Jim, who stands perfectly still until the moment you hammer, then suddenly turns into a breakdancer. And then there's the gray one whose name you never learn because every time you get near her, she tries to bite your apron off. You eye them warily. They eye you back. You mutter a short prayer to Saint Eligius, the patron saint of blacksmiths and metalworkers. You're not particularly devout, but at this point, divine intervention seems reasonable. And then there's the smell. Oh yes. Let's talk about the smell. Hot hoof. Burnt hair. Singed dirt. It's a scent that burrows into your sinuses and sets up permanent residence. You've learned to live with it. Like a weird roommate who never pays rent but occasionally buys beer. You scrape your fingers on a whetstone to clean them. The grime comes off slowly, grudgingly. Your nails are beyond saving. They're more iron than keratin now. You try not to touch your face. The apprentice brings you a bit of stale bread. You eat it standing up, watching the next horse in line like a gladiator eyeing his next opponent. Your jaw clicks with each chew. Maybe it's the bread. Maybe it's your molars filing for retirement. Still, you can't help but feel a little proud. You may not be elegant. You may not be clean. But those hooves are properly shod. Daisy didn't kill you. And for a few moments, your work will clink confidently down the road, drawing little sparks of pride with each step. You wake up to the sound of chickens arguing. They're not yours, of course. They belong to the neighbor, an elderly woman with 2 remaining teeth and a tendency to curse at the sky. You're not entirely sure she knows the chickens can't speak Latin, but it doesn't seem to stop her from berating them in it. You roll off the straw mattress. Or rather, you peel yourself off it. Your back cracks like a log in the hearth. One arm is numb. Your legs asleep. You are, physically speaking, 40% rust at this point. You limp to your bench and check your boots. They're stiff from yesterday's sweat and grime. You slide them on with a grunt and lace them as best you can with fingers that still ache from wrestling Daisy's hooves. Your entire body feels like it's been used as a practice dummy for an amateur juggler of anvils. Welcome to another day in the blacksmith's life. Contrary to popular imagination, it's not all flames and muscle-flexing glory. There's no dramatic forging montage set to medieval flute music. Mostly, it's you. Bleary-eyed. Mildly sore. Slightly resentful. Definitely hungry. Mainstream historical fact, blacksmiths in medieval villages often worked long, physically punishing hours, 6 days a week, sunrise to sundown. Sunday was for rest, which really meant, do all the stuff you couldn't during the week while your knees begged for mercy. Breakfast? That's a generous word. This morning, it's a bit of cheese that's developed a personality and a crust of rye bread so hard you could probably use it to shoe a donkey. You chew slowly, mostly to stall. Your apprentice shows up late. Again. He claims he overslept, but judging by the twigs in his hair and the hickey on his neck, he probably overslept in the hayloft behind the cooper's workshop. You say nothing. Just glare. You don't have the energy to yell. Your shoulders are already screaming from yesterday's hammering. Today's to-do list includes fixing a broken plowshare, straightening 2 iron nails, yes, really, and making a batch of rivets for the wheelwright. It's not glamorous. It's barely interesting. But it's work. Fringe tidbit, in certain villages, blacksmiths were thought to have a touch of magic, not because of your dazzling personality, but because you turned stone into fire and fire into metal. Some people would whisper about you behind their hands. Others would leave odd little offerings at your door, like eggs, or herbs, or a perfectly folded sock. You never did figure that last one out. Your apprentice is supposed to help with the bellows. Instead, he's half-heartedly sweeping yesterday's soot into slightly more organized soot. You point toward the forge with your thumb. He groans, but moves. Slowly. Like a child asked to clean their room, except the room is on fire and trying to kill them. The bellows wheeze like an asthmatic bear. The coals glow red, then white. You tap your hammer against the anvil once, out of habit. The sound echoes. It's comforting, like a heartbeat. Loud. Steady. Familiar. The plowshare's cracked. Not broken, but stressed enough that one wrong hit will snap it clean. You heat it gently, watching the colors shift, black to red to orange. You hammer around the crack, softening the metal, working it inward, reinforcing the curve. The sparks are hypnotic. Your muscles remember the rhythm, even if your brain is still trying to finish waking up. And then, of course, someone knocks at the door. It's the miller's son, holding a bucket. He needs you to make a new handle. You tell him to leave it near the wall and come back tomorrow. He nods. Then asks if he can watch you work. You sigh. Say yes. He stands too close. You nudge him back with a grunt and a flick of your shoulder. He shifts nervously. You know that look. It's part admiration, part fear, part, wow, this guy smells like a chimney married a wet goat. Historians still argue whether the blacksmith's social status was high or just grudgingly tolerated. You're necessary, sure. You make tools, repair wagons, keep the horseshoes on and the hinges swinging. But people still keep their distance. You're the village furnace, warm, useful, and slightly terrifying. You finish the plowshare and move on to the nails. One of them is bent like it lost a fight with a cartwheel. You sigh. These were handmade, probably by a younger apprentice trying to impress someone. You take the nail, heat it, straighten it. Slowly. Patiently. The way you'd fix a crooked tooth if you could do it with fire and force. The second nail is worse. You consider melting it down entirely, but you're short on iron and patience. As you work, the miller's son asks questions. What's that? Why do you hit it like that? Is it true you once made a sword? You answer each one with grunts and the occasional sarcastic maybe. The truth is, yes, you made a sword. Once. It was heavy, not particularly elegant, and mostly decorative. The lord's cousin wanted to hang it on a wall to impress guests. You forged it in 3 days. Your arms hurt for 3 weeks. The bell rings outside. It's noon. Already. You stop just long enough to chew another bit of bread and drink tepid water from a jug. It tastes like regret and ashes. You miss ale. You used to drink more, but now it just makes your joints creak louder in the mornings. The rest of the afternoon disappears in a blur of noise, heat, and repetitive strain. You hammer until your wrist clicks. You stoke until the coals hiss. You shape iron until it obeys, not because it wants to, but because you won't stop until it does. Eventually, the apprentice taps your shoulder. The sun's dipping. The forge is cooling. You blink. The sky's pink. Your arms are jelly. You hang your apron. Your hands throb. Your feet feel like bags of potatoes strapped to anvils. But the jobs are done. The tools are repaired. The village, for now, is quietly humming along. You step outside, sniff the cool air, and listen to the chickens fighting again. Honestly, you envy them. Your fingers hurt before you even open your eyes. That's not a poetic exaggeration, it's just Tuesday. You flex one hand under the scratchy blanket, and it makes the sound of an old wooden sign swaying in the wind. Joints popping. Skin tight. Nails full of soot, even after last night's attempt to scrub them with lye and straw. You sit up, slowly. There's a crust on your face. You think it's ash, but it might be stale drool. Either way, you decide to call it war paint and carry on. Outside, someone's already yelling. It's the tanner again. Something about a broken hinge on his cellar door. He wants it fixed today. You'd love to remind him that his entire house smells like a decomposing shoe, but instead you grunt affirmatively, because you're a professional. Not a cheerful one. But technically, still a professional. Your workday doesn't start, it limps into being. You poke the forge like it's a wild animal that might still bite. You're almost certain it growled at you once. You coax the embers to life with the bellows, each pump feeling heavier than the last. The fire flares and finally agrees to exist. Barely. The apprentice is missing again. You figure he's either asleep in a pile of hay, kissing the brewer's daughter, or both. Honestly, good for him. Mainstream historical fact, the labor of blacksmithing was not only demanding but also alarmingly repetitive. Day after day, you'd perform the same movements, strike, turn, quench, repeat. It wasn't just physical, it was meditative, in the same way that smashing your head against a wall for 30 years becomes meditative. Eventually, it stops being pain. It's just what you do. Today's agenda. Brackets. A lot of them. You're reinforcing a barn door for the reeve, the local official who thinks his ox breathes better air than the rest of the village. He brought the iron rods yesterday. Bent. Uneven. Like they'd been used to fence in drunk pigs. You heat the first rod, letting the forge lick it into obedience. The air smells like metal and old sweat. You hammer out the kinks with a soft, steady rhythm. It's loud, but you've stopped noticing. These days, silence feels unnatural. Like you're missing something. Like the world stopped ticking. And then the boy returns. Covered in feathers. He says something about a goose and a misunderstanding. You choose to pretend you didn't hear him. He begins sweeping again, somehow missing 90% of the dirt on the floor. You gesture vaguely at the anvil, which he takes as a cue to go organize the tools. It's a poor assumption, but better than nothing. Fringe tidbit: some blacksmiths, especially in remote towns, were also called upon to mend odd things, musical instruments, toys, even religious relics. You once tried to fix a bishop's cracked censer and ended up setting off a cloud of incense so thick it caused 3 mild hallucinations and 1 accidental marriage proposal. You've been cautious about ecclesiastical repair ever since. Back at the workbench, the brackets start to take shape. Bend. Cool. Test. Adjust. Over and over again. The Reeve pops in mid-morning to check on progress, which really means, breathe loudly and offer unhelpful suggestions. He picks up one of the cooling brackets and burns his fingers. You nod solemnly. Say, she bites when she's mad. He doesn't laugh. He never does. You hand him a rag and keep hammering. The forge flares again, casting shadows that dance across the walls like ancient spirits reenacting the world's slowest sword fight. Historians still argue whether medieval blacksmiths were regarded as craftsmen or merely laborers. The answer, like most historical truths, is somewhere in the squishy middle. You're essential, yes. But no one throws feasts for the guy who fixes hinges. You don't get songs. You get requests. And sometimes payment, if you're lucky. The Reeve leaves. You exhale, long and slow. You take a moment to stretch your back. It sounds like a staircase collapsing. Your knees echo the sentiment. You glance at your hands, they're blistered, raw, calloused, stained. A museum of pain. But efficient. You can pick up a horseshoe with your fingers and tell whether it'll hold. You can sense a crack forming in a blade before it even appears. Your fingers know metal. More than they know softness, or warmth, or anything human. You pour some water into your mouth from the jug. It's warm and tastes vaguely of last week's nails. Hydration is hydration. You wipe your lips with your sleeve and get back to it. The last bracket gives you trouble. The metal is stubborn. It refuses to curve cleanly. You swear under your breath, not loudly, just enough for the iron to know you're serious. You adjust the angle, reheat, and strike again. And again. Finally, it yields. It always does. They all do, eventually. You stack the brackets near the door. One clinks to the side. You pick it up, run a thumb along the edge, and feel pride. Maybe. Or maybe just exhaustion in a slightly different costume. The apprentice pipes up, why don't we make something fun? You stare. He continues, like a sword. Or armor. Something cool. You nod slowly, dramatically. Because no one pays for cool. They pay for useful. He slumps. You smirk. He'll learn. Or he'll quit. Either way, the forge doesn't care. The rest of the afternoon slides by in heat and rhythm. Hammerfall. Ember dance. Metals hiss as it kisses water. You lose time the way one loses socks. Quietly. Inevitably. It just disappears, until suddenly the sky outside is going red and the light through your window slants sideways and soft. You close the shutters. Pull your apron off. Your chest feels tight from the smoke, but your muscles feel loose, pliable. Like the metal you worked today. You're not happy, exactly. But there's something like peace in it. Something close. On your way home, the Reeves son rides past on a pony, brackets installed, door swinging smoothly. He doesn't say thank you. But you hear the iron squeak softly, cleanly. You know your work held. You walk on, hands shoved into soot-stiff pockets, back aching, belly rumbling. Another day spent holding the village together. One stubborn piece of metal at a time. You dream you're underwater, floating in something thick and dark. It takes you a moment to realize, it's not a dream. It's your blanket, soaked in your own sweat. Again. Welcome to summer in a forge. You sit up and instantly regret it. Your back has taken on the rigidity of a cathedral pew. Your arms feel like they've been used as battering rams. You stretch, and somewhere inside your spine, a ratchet clicks. There's a pounding at the door. You're not even dressed yet. You yank on your breeches and limp barefoot to the door, which swings open to reveal, unsurprisingly, the baker. He's cradling a bent iron peel like it's a wounded dog. It folded under the bread again, he mutters. You resist the urge to point out that he's not exactly using it gently. You agree to fix it. Eventually. You tell him to leave it beside the trough. He doesn't leave immediately. He lingers, trying to be polite about the smell. Blacksmiths have a distinct aroma: smoke, sweat, scorched wool, and frustration. You thank him with a nod that translates to, "Please go away before I turn this hammer into a boomerang." Mainstream historical fact: blacksmiths didn't just make horseshoes and nails, they were responsible for everything metal in a village. That included cooking utensils, locks, candle holders, hinges, agricultural tools, and yes, even the baker's peel. You weren't a specialist, you were an everythingist, expected to repair or recreate whatever broke in someone's everyday life. You finally stagger into the forge, which has managed to stay hot overnight, like a resentful dragon. You stoke it into proper flames with the bellows, each puff sending your shoulders deeper into protest mode. Outside, it's already warm. The kind of sticky heat that makes your clothes cling and your thoughts sluggish. Your apprentice shows up, wearing one boot and chewing on something that might be an onion. You stare at him, silently questioning every decision that brought you to this moment. He shrugs and picks up the broom. Today, you have a special project. The tailor's shears snapped yesterday. Mid-snip, apparently. Now he's running around the village wrapped in half-finished tunics and yelling about sabotage. He wants the shears fixed, or a new pair forged. Preferably yesterday. You sigh and pull out the pieces. The blade snapped near the fulcrum, and the metal's grain looks like it's been over-hardened. Probably made by some city smith who valued speed over balance. Fringe tidbit: tailoring shears were among the more delicate tools you might be asked to forge. Some were imported, but most were made locally and required a surprising amount of finesse, especially the pivot joint, which needed just the right balance of tension and smoothness. You'd spend an hour shaping them, then another hour listening to someone complain that they're too stiff or not elegant enough for my linen. You start with the steel bar. It's a finer grade iron, harder to work than the usual plowshare scraps. You heat it until it glows orange, then hammer it gently. The trick is shaping without over-hardening. Too much heat, and it'll warp. Too little, and it'll snap under stress, again. The apprentice tries to help by adjusting the bellows. He adjusts them wrong. You bark a wordless noise that somehow communicates, "Stop that or I'll throw you into the cooling trough." He freezes. The forge breathes normally again. You hammer. And file. And hammer again. The blades start to take form, twin curves of shiny silver, kissed red at the tips. You quench them halfway, then reheat just the edges. You don't want brittleness near the pivot. Historians still argue whether medieval blacksmiths learned from standardized apprenticeships or by sheer, brutal trial and error. The answer? Both. You had to learn the rules, but you really learned by screwing things up and then fixing them while someone yelled about how expensive the iron was. By midday, the blades are nearly done. You carve a slot for the rivet and test the motion. They're stiff. You file the joint, work the blades open and closed, then add a bit of goose fat as lubricant. It smells like cooked regret, but it works. You test the shears on a strip of linen from an old shirt. Clean cut. Smooth. No snags. You set them on the bench and nod, mildly impressed with yourself. Then remember, the tailor still owes you 3 silver coins for the last job. Your stomach growls. You eat lunch standing up. A piece of smoked fish that might be older than The Apprentice. The bread is dry again. Of course it is. You dunk it in water and pretend it's soup. You make jokes in your head like, this tastes like disappointment, but with more texture. You're halfway through chewing when the local priest arrives. He needs a new sensor chain. You squint at him. Last time, you made the chain perfectly, but the sensor swung wildly during Mass and burned a small hole in the altar cloth. You told him not to swing it like he was auditioning for a fencing match, but he insists it was a spiritual movement. Still, work is work. You take the job. Making a chain isn't glamorous. It's fiddly. You heat narrow strips of iron, bend them into loops, weld them closed, and assemble them one by one. It's monotonous, but weirdly satisfying. The rhythm of clicking links calms you, and you fall into a gentle trance, twist, link, weld, cool. Again and again. The priest waits patiently, watching with interest. You ask him if he ever considered swinging the sensor less. He laughs. Only when I miss and hit the choirboy. You blink. He chuckles. You don't. You hand over the finished chain. He tests its swing. It's better. You both silently hope it won't start a fire during Vespers. Late afternoon brings one last customer, the shepherd. His crook has a cracked iron tip. You fix it quickly, without even needing to reheat, just a few hammer taps and a file. He pays in cheese. You're too tired to argue. The sun dips again. You bank the fire. Hang your apron. Wash your hands in the trough. The water turns black. You stare into it, watching your reflection ripple. You look like someone who's fought 12 wars and lost half of them. But you're still standing. You sit by the forge one last time, soaking in the fading heat. And for a brief moment, as the coals glow dim red and the world outside slows down, you feel something close to serenity. Almost. You don't remember falling asleep, but you remember waking up. There's a pounding in your ears, and for a moment you think something's wrong with your heart. Then you realize, it's the hammering echo of yesterday, still bouncing around your skull like an aggressive ghost with a grudge. You groan and sit up. Something in your neck pops. Something in your ankle grumbles. Your body has fully embraced the lifestyle of a creaky old gate, useful, but liable to snap when kicked. Outside, it's foggy. The village is shrouded in a damp mist that makes the forge smell like wet dog hair and burnt leather. You wrap a tattered cloak around your shoulders and crunch your way to the workshop, boots wet with dew before you've even made it past the chickens. One of them stares at you like it remembers what you did to that broken weather vane last week. Inside the forge, it's dark. Cold. Silent. Just for a moment. You prod the coals back to life with a poker. The embers blink lazily, annoyed to be disturbed. You pump the bellows once, twice, and the flames lick upward. They remember who's boss. You light a candle from the forge and set it on the bench. Today's going to be long. Your project. Horseshoes. A whole set. 5 horses, so 20 shoes, if none are missing extra hooves. Which you've learned not to assume. Mainstream historical fact, horseshoes weren't one size fits all. They had to be custom shaped to fit each horse's hooves, which wore unevenly depending on terrain, usage, and diet. A good farrier, often the blacksmith, could tell what kind of work a horse did just by examining the wear pattern on its old shoes. You grab a blank shoe and heat it until it glows red. You hammer it into a gentle curve on the anvil's horn, then flip it to even out the edges. It's rhythmic, almost hypnotic. You've done this 1,000 times, and each time it still feels like wrestling with something stubborn that wants to remain flat and useless. Your apprentice shows up. For once, he's early. You give him a look of mild suspicion, and he sheepishly admits he overslept at the stables. Slept on hay. Got pecked by a goose. You nod sagely. Character building. He begins cleaning the workshop without being told. You're tempted to check for a fever, but decide not to ruin the moment. Fringe tidbit: some superstitious villagers believed a blacksmith's touch could heal ailments, especially in children or livestock. You once tapped a pig on the snout as a joke and were hailed as a miracle worker for a week. The pig had just been choking on a beetle. Back to the horseshoes. You hammer, file, punch holes for nails, and test the arc on a wooden hoof mold. Each one is slightly different, and your hands adjust without thinking. Muscle memory. Years of it, carved into your very bones. You could do this in your sleep, and sometimes, frankly, you do. Halfway through the sixth shoe, a small child runs in, barefoot and grinning. He's the cooper's boy, and he's holding a bent chisel like it's a magic wand. Apparently, he tried to make a squirrel cage and ended up breaking one of his father's tools. He begs you to fix it before his dad finds out. You sigh, take the chisel, and promise nothing. The blade's warped. You heat it gently, then retemper it. As you do, you imagine the squirrel cage. You try not to imagine the squirrel. You're not sure if this is animal husbandry or a tiny prison system in development. The chisel cools quickly. You hand it back. The boy beams and runs off. You hear him trip over a bucket outside, followed by a squirrel-like squeak. You pretend it didn't happen. The bellows groan again, and the forge flares. You keep working through the morning, shaping shoes, alternating arms to give each side of your body a chance to scream. By noon, the stable master shows up. He's a large man with a voice like gravel and the temperament of wet burlap. He examines your progress without speaking, then grunts approval. That's as close as you'll get to a compliment. He leaves behind a basket of eggs as partial payment. One is already cracked. You decide it's symbolic. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were considered part of the peasant class or held a semi-respected artisan status. Some sources suggest smiths occupied a strange liminal space, essential but vaguely feared. You had power, after all. You shaped metal. You worked with fire. You bent earth to your will. That made people nervous. And maybe rightly so. You've seen what metal can do. A sharp edge. A sudden failure. The sound of a tool snapping mid-use and the silence that follows. Blacksmiths live between strength and fragility. It teaches you respect. For the forge. For the metal. For your own tired hands. Afternoon comes. You finish the last horseshoe and line them up on a rack, 20 of them, cooling in the shade like sunbathing turtles. The apprentice tries to count them but gets distracted halfway through. You quietly double-check behind him. You eat a bit of bread and cheese and wonder, not for the first time, if your stomach will ever forgive you. Then a merchant arrives. He's from out of town. He's sweaty, loud, and carries a sack of broken hinges like it's made of gold. Apparently, he bought a fine wooden chest from some coastal trader, only to find the hinges rusted shut and useless. He demands new ones. Shiny ones. Something with flair. You suppress a sigh and gesture for him to show you. He does. They're awful. Bent like soggy biscuits. You tell him you can do better. You set to work, choosing bronze instead of iron this time. It's softer, a little more luxurious. You heat, cut, and shape it into ornate little scrolls, adding a few hammered designs for good measure. They're still just hinges, but they look fancy. The merchant claps like a drunk court jester. You accept his coin and wonder if he's ever lifted anything heavier than a feather quill. Evening settles in slowly, draping the forge in gold and shadow. The fire dies down. Your hands ache again, but it's the kind of ache you're used to. Like old boots that never quite stop pinching. You watch the apprentice sweep. He's humming. Badly. And for a second, Just a second, you imagine a day where someone else stands where you are now. A future blacksmith. Covered in soot. Grumbling at geese. Carrying the heat of your work into the next century. But only for a second. Then you blow out the candle and head home. Tomorrow, the forge will need you again. Not by choice, of course. Your body's just done with sleeping. It doesn't even ask anymore. There's a certain fatigue that's no longer about rest, it's about momentum. You don't stop because you're refreshed. You stop because you ran out of time. The air outside is thick and yellow-gray, promising either a storm or a miracle. Probably a storm. You grab a handful of yesterday's bread and chew as you walk, no butter, no shame. The forge greets you with its usual groggy silence. It always feels like entering the belly of a sleeping animal. Still warm, still dangerous, always hungry. You start the fire again. Your muscles already remember the motions. Pull the bellows. Shift the coal. Feed it breath until it roars. Today's job is a bit different. A noble's cart lost a wheel. The axle tree cracked under its weight, and now, surprise, it's your problem. They sent a servant at dawn with a purse and a very long list of vague demands. The metal rim must be properly elegant. The bolts must be refined. The fittings should be befitting a man of standing. In other words, they want you to make a will feel like a throne. You grit your teeth and nod politely. Mainstream historical fact, nobility often relied on local blacksmiths to repair traveling equipment, including weapons, armor, and carts. While nobles typically employed personal smiths for estate maintenance, village smiths were essential for on-the-go fixes. It was a strange, transactional truce, brief intersections between classes that otherwise pretended not to notice each other. You inspect the damaged wheel rim. The iron band is warped beyond recovery. The bolts are mangled. And there's a crack in the bracket that held the axle, which must have carried more wine than any cart was designed for. You sketch a rough replacement with chalk on the workbench. The apprentice peers over your shoulder, utterly lost. You consider explaining it, but decide you'd rather not resketch it 5 times. So, you heat the bar stock. It's heavier than usual, meant for cart hardware. You measure out lengths for brackets, bolts, and that ridiculous, elegant rim. The forge spits sparks as the iron heats, and the first strike sends a shiver through your wrist. You ignore it. You've been ignoring it for years. Fringe tidbit, some smiths made subtle marks in their work, tiny stamps or etched initials hidden inside fittings or hardware. Not for credit. Just, to be remembered. If someone ever took the piece apart, they'd find a name. A whisper that someone made this. You've never done that. Not yet. But maybe today's the day. As you shape the new iron rim, you think about wheels. Endless circles. Rolling over the same roads. Carrying people who never think twice about what's under them. You're not a wheel, but you've forged enough of them to know how much of life is just rotation. Hot metal. Cold mornings. Unpaid debts. Repeat. The apprentice asks if he can try riveting. You say no. He pouts. You hand him a file instead. You start shaping the bolt heads, hexagonal, decorative, strong enough to hold even the weight of noble dignity. You tap lightly, turn, tap again. The balance has to be just right. Historians still argue whether cart hardware evolved due to smith innovations or changes in road quality. Probably both. More travel meant better carts meant more demand for strong yet elegant fittings. That meant, more work for you. Lucky you. By midday, you're assembling the rim. You heat and bend the iron band to match the wheel's diameter. This part's tricky. If you get the measurement wrong, even slightly, the band won't shrink fit properly. You need it to be just wider than the wheel, so it can be heated, expanded, placed, and then allowed to cool and contract tightly around the wooden core. The noble's man returns to check your progress. He sniffs the air, as if offended by the concept of iron. Then he mutters something about expediency, and disappears before you can hand him a hammer. You mutter something not suitable for church. You press the hot rim onto the wheel. It hisses, steam rising like the forge itself is exhaling in pain. The wood absorbs the heat, blackening slightly, but holding. You pour water over the seam to quicken the cooling. The whole shop smells like scorched bark and ash. It's oddly pleasant. The apprentice watches, wide-eyed. That's magic, he says. You grunt. That's physics. Magic charges extra. He doesn't laugh. You pretend not to be disappointed. You turn to the bolts, fitting them into the iron brackets. Each one has to be tight enough to grip but not so tight it stresses the wood. You tap them into place, and for the first time today, everything lines up cleanly. You test the assembly, rolling the wheel back and forth across the floor. It spins without wobble. A small victory. You allow yourself the luxury of a slow nod. Then, without fanfare, you scratch your mark into the underside of the rim. A tiny symbol, simple, discreet. Not for show. Just a reminder. You were here. You did this. Evening edges in. The noble's servant returns, this time with a slightly more grateful look on his face. He inspects the work, sniffs again, and grudgingly hands over a full pouch of coins. Real silver. Not chipped. Not fake. Not buttons. You almost ask if it's a mistake. But you don't. Instead, you tuck the coins into your belt and gesture toward the door. He loads the wheel onto a cart and rides off, shouting something about his master's eternal satisfaction. You're pretty sure it's the nicest thing anyone in his circle has ever said to someone in yours. You sit on the anvil. The forge is winding down again. The fire's dull. The air is thick. You roll your shoulders and stretch your arms, which feel like they've been forged themselves. The apprentice offers you a cup of something vaguely wine-adjacent. You sip it. It's terrible. You drink it anyway. And for a moment, you're struck by the odd truth that some part of today mattered. That will carry someone over hills and through cities. Maybe it'll crack again in a year, maybe it'll hold for 5. Either way, a piece of you is going with it. And that's something. You drag yourself into the forge, fingers stiff and face still smelling faintly of yesterday's smoke and sweat. There's a familiar dull ache running like a quiet drumbeat through your bones. You don't like it, but you've made peace with it. It's a badge of honor, one forged in fire, both literal and metaphorical. Today is different. You've been tasked with repairing armor. Not just any armor, but a set that once belonged to a knight. Well, at least that's what the traveling minstrel claimed. The armor is dented, scratched, and smelling faintly of old wine and regret. The metal plates are heavier than you expected, as if they carry the weight of their stories with them. You run your fingers over the jagged edges of a breastplate. This armor saved someone, or at least tried to. It didn't do a perfect job. You wonder if the knight is still alive or just a ghost passed down in song. Mainstream historical fact, medieval blacksmiths were often the go-to armorers, especially in villages without dedicated armor workshops. They repaired helmets, breastplates, and even chainmail, sometimes improvising with limited materials and tools. You set the breastplate on the anvil, eyeing the biggest dent. You know what to do: heat, hammer, cool, repeat, but this time, there's an emotional weight that makes the metal feel heavier. Your apprentice watches closely, still not allowed near the hammer, but allowed to pass you the tools and keep the workspace clean. He's quieter today, probably sensing the somber mood. Fringe tidbit: some smiths believed armor carried the spirit of its wearer. Repairing it wasn't just fixing metal, it was mending memories, hopes, and sometimes regrets. You're not sure you believe that, but you handle the plates with extra care anyway. You heat the dented plate in the forge's belly until it glows angry red. The heat makes the metal pliable, almost alive. You hammer with steady strikes, coaxing the dent back into shape. It's slow work. The metal resists, protesting the change. But eventually, the surface smooths out, the dents fading like bad memories. You pause, wiping sweat from your brow. The forge's heat has soaked into your skin, making your shirt cling uncomfortably. You glance at the apprentice, who looks impressed enough to say something, but doesn't. Historians still argue whether village blacksmiths had the skills to fully restore battle-ready armor or if they mostly performed makeshift repairs until knights could visit specialized workshops. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. You move on to the helmet, which has a cracked visor. You delicately reforge the bent metal, reattaching hinges with careful riveting. The visor feels lighter in your hands once repaired, as if it's ready to be raised again for a fight, or maybe just a parade. As the afternoon drags on, a faint noise interrupts your concentration. It's a soft humming, not from the forge, but from outside. You step out and see the village children playing near the creek, their laughter bouncing off the stones. One of them has fashioned a tiny sword from a broken stick and is fighting an invisible enemy with all the seriousness of a seasoned warrior. You smile despite the ache in your back. You think about how different their battles are from yours. Their weapons are light, their wounds imaginary. You remember the scars on your own hands and wonder how many stories they could tell. The apprentice returns with a cracked mug of ale. "For you," he says awkwardly. You take it and sip slowly, savoring the bitter warmth. It's not much, but it's yours. As the sun begins to dip, you finish the last repair, a chainmail glove with a few missing links. You replace them carefully, threading each ring like weaving a tiny tapestry. You step back and look at the restored armor. It's far from perfect, but it's whole again. The village blacksmith's work is never glamorous. It's sweat, grit, and patience. It's fixing what's broken, not just metal, but sometimes the spirit. You blow out the forge's last ember and stretch. Your body protests, but you're used to the complaint. Tonight, you'll sleep, but not for long. Tomorrow, the anvil calls again. The night wraps around you like a heavy wool cloak, the kind that's seen better days but still does the job. Your bed is a simple straw mattress, the kind that pokes you in places you didn't know could be poked. But tonight, it feels like a throne after the relentless labor of the day. You stare at the ceiling, wooden beams darkened by centuries of smoke and the secrets whispered between them. Outside, the wind carries the faint murmur of village life winding down, chickens settling, dogs claiming their spots, and the ever-present rhythm of the forge fading into memory. Your mind drifts back through the day, through the smell of hot iron, the sting of cold metal, the steady beat of hammer on anvil. You remember the hiss of cooling steel, the scuff of worn leather boots, and even the tiny moments of unexpected kindness, the cracked mug of ale, the chipped but genuine smile of the apprentice, the unspoken camaraderie of sweat and soot. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were seen merely as laborers or as vital artisans whose craft bound the community together. Whatever the truth, you know this, your work is the pulse beneath the village's skin. You shape the tools of survival and protection, the wheels that carry dreams and burdens alike. The flicker of a candle nearby casts shadows that dance slowly, like the embers of your own endurance. You feel the heaviness of your limbs, the slow uncoiling of tension, the soft sinking into quiet. You close your eyes and hear the rhythmic tapping in your mind, the hammer's echo, steady and persistent. It is a lullaby, a reminder that even in the hardest, darkest days, there is purpose. There is meaning in shaping, forging, mending. Tonight, you let the fatigue wash over you like a gentle tide, pulling you away from the forge's heat to a place of calm. The world outside waits, always turning, always demanding. But for now, there is only this, the quiet, the dark, the soft hum of life slowing to rest. You breathe in deeply, and slowly, slowly breathe out. Good night, blacksmith. Tomorrow, the fire will rise again.